For over 10 years, I couldn't get my productions to sound how I wanted, so I buried myself in online tutorials trying to figure out why, and even having some of the same tools as other producers and mixers I envied, my productions weren't coming even close. I've heard the term referencing get thrown around, and I thought I was referencing the right way myself, but I was totally wrong, and over time developed a referencing system that would help me produce any desired result. I'm excited to announce that you can now use this same system yourself in our new course, The Magical Guide to Referencing. This gives you the exact framework I've used and successfully taught hundreds of students through the years. If you're ready to stop chasing your mixing tail in circles and ready to understand any mix you hear to replicate those same results for yourself, you can find a link to the Magical Guide to Referencing in the description wherever you're listening. See you there, my friends. Hello and welcome to Working in Music Sucks. My name is John Maciel, and for almost 2 decades I've been working in the audio recording industry. I've worked with producers and mixers like Bo Rochelle, Joey Sturgis, and Josh Newell, and countless others on records with bands like Era, Census Fell, and Moose Blood. And along this journey, I've also worked with 2 of the biggest music educational companies where I helped thousands of aspiring engineers achieve their dreams of making music production a fulfilling full-time career. But as great as that sounds, to be honest, the first 10 years of working in music sucked. I started this podcast to talk about what sucks about working in music so others like myself who love music production and want to wake up every morning fulfilled and driven to making records people love can do just that. Working in music sucks, but with what we talk about on this podcast, it doesn't have to any longer. If that sounds like your cup of coffee, then you're in the right place, my friends. Let's get into it.
Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of this podcast. In today's episode, going to be talking about something that I think many audio engineers and mixers struggle with figuring out, thinking that it's so many different things. And that is, what makes a great mix and how do you get a great mix? And what's the secret? And we'd all like to think that it's all the tools and all the gear that we see all these pros use. But I can tell you from personal experience, I wish someone would have told me what I figured out a couple years back right out the gate. And that is that the secret to a great mix is just having a great sense of taste for what the song needs. Now, that might sound completely ridiculous, but we often get fixated on, what's the best EQ that's going to give me the best tonal qualities? What's the best tape saturation? What's the best whatever effect or piece of gear that's going to give me what I need for this great mix that I'm chasing for? But the thing is, after watching so many mixers that I look up to mix with outboard gear and in-the-box plugins and as well, just mixing with like whatever they have at their disposal, yet everything still comes out sounding great, I started realizing that it's not all about the theory, it's not all about the gear. And we love to think that it is, but the truth is that the secret to a great mix is going to be your taste and how you develop those tastes. And that comes with accepting that you need to get through, hundreds of bad mixes and working with clients and artists and understanding what is the range of tolerance of how far you can push things based on your style. Because when people are hiring you at the beginning, usually it's, we're going for this type of sound, that type of sound. And you start learning how to do it in your way and also what you like and your preferences. And then as your career grows, people start hiring you because of your taste, right? And often we ignore that for far too long because we're obsessed with like, how do we make this mix sound as sonically beautiful as possible? When really that's not always the solution. A perfect sounding mix doesn't turn it into a great song. Unfortunately, we'd like to think that like, if you can hear every instrument perfectly clear in the mix and all this other stuff, that's going to be what makes this a great song, a great mix and a great song. And it's really not. Like, yes, having those qualities as a mixer and engineer who can capture those type of elements in your productions, yeah, that's going to help a lot. But it's not ultimately going to be the defining factor, which is, have you spent enough time developing your taste based on what's appropriate within hip hop tracks, a pop track, heavy metal? There's so many different genres of music that have different rules. Like sonically, everything is very similar. We can, once you understand like bass frequencies, synths, bass guitars, distorted guitars, clean guitars, vocals, things of that nature. You start seeing like once you have that theory down, then you can go across any genre and kind of figure out like, okay, where in these ranges are instruments supposed to be, what's supposed to be happening, what is appropriate for the genre, but what do I like? What are my tastes? How can I push things a little bit more than people typically would? Or maybe I like to pull back in these areas that people typically go forward on, but I'm compensating because I'm going to push in a different direction. And it's going to be your tastes that people are going to identify and be like, oh, that's really interesting that you do that. And I mean, think about how many records you've heard in the past in your life, and you a band that you love goes to a different producer or mixer, and you're just like, oh, this record sounds different, but I like it. They're exploring, they're experimenting, they're changing. And then sometimes the complete opposite happens where they're like, what were they thinking going with this producer or mixer? And then the follow-up record, we see the artist go back to who they were working with before. They tried to get some different tastes going, and it didn't work. People did not enjoy it. So then they revert to the other side. But as mixers and audio engineers and producers, we often get so fixated on chasing sonic perfection instead of how does it make you feel? Like, do you feel emotion to this guitar part as you're playing it? If it doesn't make you feel anything, excitement, hatred, like I do not like that tone, or maybe you want a disgusting tone for this part, are you feeling something, or is it just sounding cool? Because a lot of the time it's finding the balance between, is it sounding cool, is it sounding right for the song, and is it emotionally provoking something in you? Because if it's check marking all those three boxes, oftentimes what's going to happen is the listener is going to resonate with one of those three. And then all of a sudden, your tastes have guided this song, this mix, or whatever it is, to something that somebody can emotionally connect with because of the taste that was involved. And when it comes to a mix, so often I talked about how mixers like to chase perfection in a mix, and that's great. But often, a really weird part of chasing that perfection in a mix can lead to like a stale, or I like to call them safe mixes. Like they sound like it's a good mix, but there's no, like, nothing's going to draw me back to this mix after the first or second listen. Like, I'm like, yeah, it was fine. It was fine. Right. But the mixes that are great are the ones that we can't stop going back to. Like, if you even think about like old records, like Led Zeppelin and Beatles and Queen, like some of those records have some like imperfections that nowadays we listen to and we're like, oh God, like they should have fixed that. But the mixes are so good because the taste that was invoked within the mix stage and all the choices in that recording make it so compelling that you're like, it's a great mix because it fits the song. It fits the emotion that this song is trying to convey. It's getting me excited. And that is the secret. And it's very, very hard to develop this and kind of learn all these necessary principles that we need to learn, and then not be afraid to step back and be like, okay, cool. I know all the theory. Now. How do I get this? How do my tastes also evolve to where I can be guided by my gut instincts to make decisions of quality that lead me to an outcome that the artist is excited about, their fans are excited about. And that is where the hard work really comes in. Learning the theory, there's a reason why the top mixers like Manny Marroquin, Tony Maserati, Chris Lord-Alge, Tom Lord-Alge, those guys get called back time and time again because of their tastes. Like some of these guys are mixing the same artists in different decades but the artist always sounds great, but the mixes always have something special. And depending on the mixer, you're like, oh, that's really cool that they did that. Oh, that's really cool. Like if you look at, like a band like Linkin Park, they've worked with Andy Wallace, they've worked with Andrew Sheps, and they've worked with Manny Marroquin. And same thing, like it still sounds like Linkin Park, but those records that they've worked on with those mixers, they have a little something different going on. And it's the taste that the mixer brings in that helps still maintain, a great mix, but the feel is different because of the taste. But the mixes are still great. And one of my favorite things, if you ever have time to go hunting for it, there's several years back, they did a Avenged Sevenfold. Did Andy Wallace has been mixing their stuff since like day one, and they did a mix with, I believe, Chris Lord Algae. I forgot for which record. It might have been like a Transformers soundtrack. I can't remember right now. I'm drawing a blank. But if you can go and find that song and the Andy Wallace version that was on the record, and like this B-side version of the mix that CLA did that they released, like it was on a record. It was very interesting to hear the differences between both mixers, and arguably both mixes were great. It was just Andy Wallace's mixes sound like Avenged Sevenfold to me, and I preferred that mix, but the CLA one wasn't terrible. It was like really good too, and I was just like, that was the first time several years ago, and I was just like, oh, holy crap, like this is really strange. And then when I started working with my mentor and we were doing test mixes for artists, and sometimes there was ways of getting a hold of the other test mixes that mixers were sending out, and hearing the different versions, like my mentor's version compared to like 2 or 3 other mixers, and hearing how all the mixes sounded great, but there was little things that each mixer did that was different, that was quantitative to their tastes. And it ultimately came down to the artist deciding, like, whose tastes do we prefer? Because these are all great mixes, but someone's taste is going to be the one that we end up going with for this record. And it really opened my eyes to, like, a great mix isn't about what tape emulation I'm using, what mix bus settings from what mixer I'm stealing and borrowing, or whatever you want to put it in. None of that matters. What matters is, are my tastes provoking an emotion that's helping this mix and this song all come together? Because that is what's going to make a great mix. And sometimes, and I'm sure people have heard, they're like, why did this band go with this? Like, why is this like record sounding like this? And the band wanted the record to sound like that, but people are just so perplexed. They're like, how come it doesn't sound cleaner, or why doesn't it sound like this or like that? And I think we can all agree, like, the biggest example of this is the St. Anger snare. It's like that record, it's just a very like, okay, aside from that snare, does the record sound good? Yeah, it sounds pretty great. But man, that one element just changes everything. And it's just so interesting to see how, like, you can have so many different people work on the same mix, but their tastes are ultimately going to be what defines the greatness of that mix. And if you don't have tastes, or you don't know how to develop those, like I was saying earlier in the podcast, you have to really work a lot with different artists and get a lot of mix notes, and like work through, like, there's levels to this, and you have to get through several different levels to figure out, like, okay, people like this, people don't like that from me, and kind of figure out, like, okay, when I make this decision, people like it. I like doing this thing, but people like when I do this thing. So I'm going to stick to the things that are going to get me up that ladder. And maybe once I'm here at this point in this ladder, what I can do is pull out this thing that I like to doing in a record that it may be more appropriate for, as opposed to just doing it because I always want to try to see if it fits. It's like, you have to find the moments in time where you're like, maybe this will work better on this song. Try it. If it doesn't work, be okay with taking it out, but having that trick in your back pocket. And what's going to happen is, you're going to have like so many moves that you always do because they're safe, essentially. Like, you know that they're going to make the artist happy because you have a 90% success rate when you do these certain moves. But it's going to be this bag of tricks over here. Then you're going to have a lot of them that you pull out every once in a while, and all of a sudden it works. And that's your taste coming into play over there. Your taste doesn't have to always be everywhere on the plate all at once. Like, chefs have a signature style, but they don't bury each meal in their signature style. They infuse themselves within the dish when it's appropriate, and they pull out tricks when appropriate per dish, so that the dish isn't overwhelmed with just personality. Like, the meal has to come through first before the personality. And it's the same thing when it comes to mixing. And once you've harnessed here's what I'm going to do because this is going to work, here is my taste, and you bring those in and you learn to like merge those two worlds, all of a sudden your mixes are going to sound great because you know how to get them in a place to where artists and their fans are going to love them and enjoy them. And then you're also going to be able to, invoke your style in there, your taste. And it's really like the coolest thing in the world when you start realizing that balance and you feel more free because you're like, okay, this record's sounding cool. Which of these tricks is going to be the one that works? And now because you have an appropriate format, it's going to be okay. Whereas where I messed up for the longest time was always trying to do every new trick in every song and people not enjoying it and saying no, here are notes, and me ending up having to take a lot of stuff off and having that realization of like, oh, I don't need to throw every trick into every song. I need to, find a baseline to what's going to work for each song and then bring in the other stuff. So, it sucks that no one told me for the longest time or was clear about how to develop this. And it's really, you need to spend time getting to a base level of how you make a good mix and pushing the boundaries, finding what's appropriate and pushing and playing with those boundaries and then pulling out some of those tricks and seeing like, okay, what can I do? Maybe you learn some tricks from like mixing EDM stuff and now you're working on like a piano song or like a piano indie record. And you're like, what cool things can I pull from this world into this world to give it just a little bit of spice? And it's something that I like, that I think is cool, that I heard in another record, but you transform it. Like all mediums do this. And when you watch movies and you see directors are like, oh, your style of filmmaking is like this person, this person, this person. It's like, yeah, we all have influences. And then that all turns into a taste, and that taste turns into what you see on screen. Sometimes it's a great, great thing that we see, and other times it's like, what was that? But it's getting to the point to where you're able to harness the power of your taste in a way that helps you achieve a great mix and not a stale, safe, boring one that, sure, artist is like, yeah, this is cool, but then they go with someone else because they're like, we like what they did here. They took some risk, and we can hear that it doesn't sound like everyone else. And that's the biggest thing that can kill your career, is not being willing to figure out your tastes and just sounding like everyone else and losing out on so many opportunities out there. So this was a little bit of a shorter episode. And, it sucks working in music and it sucks figuring all this stuff out. But hopefully with what we talked about in today's episode, you'll be able to go out there and now experiment, figure out a baseline, get some tricks, try them when it's appropriate, not always, all the time. Always focus on making the song work first and then throwing in some tricks afterwards and experimenting and finding your taste. And again, it's going to take a lot of songs and a lot of time to get to that point, but stay persistent, stay resilient, have patience, give yourself grace. Until next time, my friends.